And so people assume that things should be easy, but that's when the challenges become difficult. So I'll talk about the last parts of my journey at GH1 into TV3, and I want to use that to just let you understand that sometimes if you sit at one place, you're sitting on your blessing, and it's difficult to make that decision to eventually move, but that move is what brings the growth. But before you make that move, you should have a goal. Do you get how I'm connecting it? Okay. So latter part of my days at GH1, things had become very tough. I felt like I had grown to a certain limit, and the platform could not offer me what I wanted anymore. But I was afraid to make that bold step to leave. And that was because my whole journey as a broadcast journalist had started with GH1, when it was for Charterhouse and eventually when EIB bought it. So from the inception up until that point in my life, I felt like I owed the company, something, a favor, or my career. And so it was going to be very difficult for me to say finally that I'm done and I need to move. I was looking for a way to move because things had become very difficult. I just wasn't finding myself in that space anymore, be it relating with people, the work I was doing, because even before I started the show I was doing before I left, I was doing rhythms. And I always say that every time there needs to be a move, I just wake up, sit in my bed, and God tells me, my friend, it's time, write this down, and I do. And so I had just started the late afternoon show. Just 1 year into it, I had won an award. Then there's an opportunity for me to move, and I'm thinking, I fought so hard to have this show go on air. Because when I wanted it on air, my bosses said, I'm sorry, this is not going on air. We're not letting you leave your previous show because we're not sure we can find anybody to replace you. And so instead of creating a void, we'd rather you stay there and just plateau. I mean, they didn't say plateau, but they just said, we also couldn't find anybody who could do that job, so you might as well stay there. But I had interviewed everybody that mattered in the music industry, in the arts industry, and I was tired. Because a month later, the same person would come and I have to now think of what other question to ask. Because I was recycling them over and over. So I told myself I was done with this and I needed a show that would challenge me. And I was done talking about music only and what are you doing, what's your album about. I just wanted something a bit more challenging. My bosses said no. I had to fight. I had to cry. There were guests who would walk into the building and they'll find me crying. And they're thinking, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, my bosses don't want me to start my new show. And it was all very upset because they just didn't understand the backstory of it. Now, eventually, I had people who helped me and I started that show. A year into that show, I'm told, it's time to move again. And I'm telling God, but you just gave me this idea. So why do I have to move? And he says, well, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to move. Because I made you start this show for a reason. And that was supposed to prepare you for the next journey. I still didn't understand. So TV3 gets in touch with me. The first time, I want to move. I tell them, okay, I'll come. But at the same time, in the back of my mind, I'm like, you people, you're jokers. I'm not moving. So I accept, I sign a contract and everything. It's time for me to move. And then I have to tell them the bitter truth. I'm sorry, but I cannot make it. And it pissed everybody off, I'm sure, at TV3. They were very disappointed because they were just about ready to, put out the PR and say, so Berla is joining us. And this is me being so afraid to move. And so I got stuck in that space. For another 6 months, I was there. Now, this move came in March. So if my calculation is right, the final move I made was in September. So maybe about 5-6 months. Now, while I was there, things took a turn because I was disobedient. I knew I had to go, but I wasn't going. So God said, if that's the case, thank you. If that's the case, then I'm going to make it even more difficult for you. So now all the negative things that had to happen would happen. The backbiting started. There were a lot of accusations here and there. There were people who were treating me like I didn't matter. And I just didn't understand what it meant. But it was just God making the space uncomfortable for me. So eventually, I just told my manager that, you know what, let's see if there's still an opportunity at TV3. So we started having that conversation. They said, well, there is an opportunity still. We left that slot open for you. However, you need to assure us you're coming because we're not going to put together all the materials, getting ready to announce, and you won't come again. And I said, oh, I'm very sure I'm going. Because at that time I had it. I just couldn't take it anymore. I didn't see myself growing at that point. I was more depressed so I'd come to my show. If my show started at 3 o'clock, I'd get to work at 2:45. That's how badly I didn't want to be in that space. So 2:45, I'm there, and my boss is looking at me like, why are you coming this late? I'm like, oh, sorry, boss, I was doing something. But really, I'd wake up in the morning, and there was really no drive for me to want to be in that space. So I come at 2:45, my show ends, it's an hour, so it ends at 5, and I'm out. And that was consistent for a while. So I knew it was time. Luckily for me, there was an opportunity, and I had to move. Now, before that, I needed to ask myself, what really is your goal? Because it's not enough to say, I'm not comfortable here, so I just want to move. Sometimes you don't have a plan. Sometimes God has a plan for you. But at the same time, you also need to have an idea that, okay, maybe in the next 5 years, this is what I want to achieve. And just commit it to God and tell him that do the rest. If really this is not even the brightest idea, you know what to do. Just figure it out and help me. I'm just using my human mind. But that's why he says that your thoughts are not his thoughts and your ways are not his ways. So we plan and we plot. And we all have this fantastic idea of how in the next 5 years, I want to drive the biggest car in Ghana. I want to have the biggest house. I want to be working at the UN. But God is looking at you and thinking, my friend, maybe the UN will come, but not immediately, not in the next 5 years. Maybe I have to prepare and take you through some difficulties. And then in 20 years' time, when I'm sure that you're grown enough, you're mature enough, then I'll put you in that space. TV3 was